The Venus Perfection Plastic Surgery Centre in the capital was such a fashionable clinic that getting an appointment, even just for a consultation, was considered incredible luck. Young promising surgeon Dr. Scott Clem found himself working there, not by his own means. He was taken care of by his big fan. Or rather, not even by the young lady herself, but through the connections and contacts of her generous boyfriend. To be honest, without jokes or puns, Dr. Clem's hands were, without exaggeration, golden. After a couple of months of internships at the Plastic Surgery Centre, many instantly rejuvenated women were added to the army of beauties that the others were immediately covered with a crust of envy. Yet Scott longed for normal work as a surgeon. He missed it. He even dreamed about it at night. The operating room bathed in bright lights, a collection of shining metal instruments, a patient on the table whose life he, Scott, would save. He didn't want to sculpt new bodies and faces, but to give people a chance to live on. The fees for plastic surgeons were undoubtedly substantial, but his professional happiness didn't lie in these sweet cakes. Neither the fashionable apartment nor the expensive car shining with lacquered sides and boasting all the features of its legendary brand made him happy. He recalled the day when, after a car accident, a wealthy person's lover came to his desk with a mangled, cut-up face, which he lovingly pieced back together. Later, in the residence room, he joked with his colleagues, "Why are you laughing like horses? I've adjusted all the life-supporting functions of the body, and then I saw a goddess. It would have been a sin to disfigure such a face with a standard approach. The anesthesia was still working perfectly. I couldn't pass up the opportunity. I chiselled her face millimetre by millimetre." He was saving a life and received unexpected gratitude. He was offered a chance to change his place of work, with a salary so large that anyone would get dizzy from the bright prospects. Dr. Clem was also weak when it came to rewarding honest labour. He liked to dress stylishly, take his hearty girlfriends to nightclubs, pamper them with gifts, and enjoy weekend trips to out-of-town spa complexes. All these pleasures required significant financial investments, so he didn't resist, chose this manna from heaven, and then regretted it, though he never admitted it aloud. The appearance of a handsome and intelligent surgeon in the private clinic immediately caused female excitement among the staff. But Scott Clem didn't engage in workplace relationships on principle. As he himself argued to his male colleagues, "I never confuse the sinful with the righteous. It's apples and oranges." He joked and laughed, and the nurses lost all hope. Only Nina disagreed with him in her heart and fervently persuaded the other nurses. He just hasn't met his one true love yet, the one who will follow him to the ends of the earth, who will be by his side, as they say, in sorrow and in joy. With glowing cheeks, she rushed to study the schedule, to see who would assist the surgeon maestro in the operating room this time. She would break out in red spots if she saw her name in the appropriate column. She was a fairly skillful, experienced nurse, but too naive when it came to men. Her appearance was ordinary. Tons of makeup weren't her thing. She didn't even know how to apply it properly. Once, for a corporate party, she wore makeup that made her look like a scarecrow. The head nurse silently grabbed her by the arm, dragged her to the bathroom, and washed her face, so that Nina wouldn't embarrass herself in front of people with her clownish colouring. It wasn't difficult to realise that Nina was in love with Dr. Clem, but her female colleagues didn't tease her about it. The girl supported her whole family. She had an elderly mother and 2 younger brothers who hadn't yet finished school. In the field of complex terms, Nina was like a fish in water. Words like brachioplasty, abdominoplasty, or blepharoplasty would immediately cause holy horror in the average person. For her it was like a multiply table. She knew what she was talking about. And also, with her eyes closed, As if she could see, she immediately found elevators, retractors, forceps, equipment for osteotomy, nasal dilators, and all other local medical treasures on the special table in the operating room. She shouldn't have known about this ability, but on a bet with the other nurses, they had arranged a competition to see who would be the fastest to orient themselves if the standard order was jokingly disrupted. Nina was the first. As Dr. Clem put it, like a dashing horse ahead of the whole planet. And then he went and kissed her on the forehead as a reward. The girl almost went crazy. She was afraid to wash her face for 3 days. So now, she found herself next to the object of her adoration. During the next surgical intervention, she couldn't imagine greater happiness. Everything would have been fine in the friendly team of the Plastic Surgery Centre, but is there any decent institution without its own homegrown grey cardinal? This honourable role of the apex of other people's fates, the instigator of all under-the-carpet games, was taken on by the director of the medical institution. From the very beginning, Jack Garrett didn't like the newcomer, even though Dr. Clem turned out to be a talented surgeon. He was keeping a warm place for his wife's younger brother, while he was gaining surgical strength in another hospital, working on ordinary citizens to hone his skills, so to speak. The director of the clinic was preparing the place here to serve rich clients. Mr. Garrett himself was never a surgeon, a psychotherapist by speciality. He could, if necessary, diffuse any conflict or disagreement with clients. He was both hard and soft when necessary. When needed, steel notes would appear in his voice. When the situation required it, he could be creepy and cunning, like a forest predator. Dr. Clem never tried to gauge the chief's mood. He operated as naturally as he breathed. There was no shortage of patients eager to go under his knife. Thanks to his efforts, a steady stream of income flowed into the clinic's coffers. The owners of this plastic surgery kingdom treated their specialists well. During operations, Dr. Clem often repeated a phrase like a mantra: "Scalpel cuts, scalpel heals." When Nina heard him mumbling, she immediately asked, "What's that saying?" He replied, "I was fortunate to study under one of the most remarkable surgeons. I even assisted him when he visited the hospital where I used to work. This elderly doctor once told me, people fear the scalpel, thinking it will bring them terrible pain. But firstly, we don't perform surgeries without anaesthesia, thank God. Secondly, it's a surgeon's fate to bring relief through acute intervention. Without a scalpel, none of us could do our job. So, the scalpel cuts, but the scalpel also heals. That's an indisputable fact." Nina took this lesson to heart and memorized it. When the clinic received new, expensive imported medical equipment, Nina burst into the residence room with glistening eyes. "Dr. Clem, they've brought such wonderful instruments, the most legendary brands. The bosses spared no expense. There are scalpels, disposable blades, and even the most famous safety blades for this type of surgical equipment. I was dazzled by their splendour. You must see it all." Scott smiled indulgently. He suspected this quick-witted medical professional had feelings for him. Her enthusiasm was both sweet and a little amusing. So he replied good-naturedly to his assistant, "Nina, I will check them out later. And now I have my time to enjoy my coffee in peace. We have a scheduled surgery to remove fat bags. I hope the patient has recovered from her thread lift, so we can perfect her cheeks. She is a pop singer, so let's take her beauty seriously." Dr. Clem patted the nurse on the shoulder, making her blush instantly. "I'd better run. There's not much time left," she exclaimed. This innocent scene didn't escape the director, who had just entered the resident room. Immediately, an insidious plan formed in his mind to expel the hated doctor from the clinic, and with shame. After the operation to remove fat bags from the vocalist, Nina was going home. In her mind, she had had a wonderful day. The new scalpels hadn't been used yet. Dr. Clem had worked with a surgical laser knife. But what did it matter? They had been close to each other for a long time, occasionally brushing against one another during the procedure. Nina cherished this memory. At the entrance to the storeroom, where the new medical equipment was stacked, she encountered the director. Mr. Garrett winked conspiratorially and called out in a velvety, caressing baritone, "Nina, you're just who I needed. Come to my office in a few minutes. I have a delicate errand for you." The tired nurse didn't want to stay late at work, but the chief's orders were non-negotiable. A couple of minutes later, she timidly knocked on the chief's office door. He greeted her warmly, praising her professionalism, and offered her some Chinese tea with an unusual flavour. Nina took a few sips of the hot drink and soon felt as if she'd downed 200 grams of vodka in one go. Everything seemed to make sense, but as if through a fog, and she felt inexplicably happy. Mr. Garrett handed her a small piece of paper and smiled encouragingly. "I want to surprise our best surgeon. You realise we're talking about Dr. Clem, right? I think he's fond of you, so he'll surely listen to you. There's a surprise for him in the storeroom on the far shelves. The latest surgical equipment from Switzerland, which you won't find in any other domestic clinic. Write him a note inviting him to meet you in the pantry. Say you want to tell him something innovative for his medical endeavours." 5 minutes later, Mr. Garrett had a note in front of him that read, "Dr. Clem, I'm expecting you in the storeroom in 10 minutes. I have to show you something critical concerning your future work. Signed, Nina." Mr. Garrett practically dragged the girl to the storeroom. Her legs, affected by the sleeping pills, dissolved in the magic tea, could barely support her. She fell asleep on the way. Meanwhile, Dr. Clem was showering in the staff bathroom. He would have gone home already, but the residents' chat for his luxurious new building had warned that the water would be shut off for the next 2 days due to technical reasons. At first, he considered visiting one of his girlfriends for a bath and a delicious meal, but he realised he was so exhausted after 2 scheduled surgeries, rounds, and on-duty patient consultations that he craved only one thing: to be in his own apartment in his soft, comfortable bed. When Mr. Garrett slipped the note into Scott's uniform pocket, he was rinsing his hair. Naturally, he didn't hear retreating footsteps. In the pantry, Nina sat on the floor, sleeping peacefully. The director, who had orchestrated a multifaceted plan, returned to his office. He was eager to see if his late-night scheming would bear fruit. He congratulated himself for keeping a copy of the blind spot diagram when they installed video surveillance in the clinic. His habit of hoarding documents just in case had paid off. He had manoeuvred Nina through these invisible areas, and that oaf Clem would undoubtedly blunder into the most visible spots, right where he'd be caught. For some reason, Mr. Garrett was absolutely certain his plan would work flawlessly. All he had to do was wait a little longer. Dr. Clem, oblivious to the chief's devious plans, felt rejuvenated after a contrast shower. His fatigue vanished completely. He praised himself for enduring the bracing jets of cold water. He even contemplated visiting his girlfriend, considering the 24-hour shift ahead of him. There might not be time for her affection later in the week. As Scott began rolling up his uniform for the clinic's laundry, he felt something rustle in his jacket pocket. Instantly, he was reading the nurse's message, wondering what the girl had concocted. Slipping on his soft slippers, he hurried to the storeroom. Nina was nowhere to be seen. "Is she playing a prank on me?" he thought irritably. "This is hardly the time for such nonsense. It's not even Fool's Day." He navigated the shelves in the semi-darkness, with only small wall-mounted bulbs providing dim illumination. He nearly tripped over Nina, who was sitting on the floor. Startled, he quickly regained his composure. The girl was in a deep sleep, unresponsive to his touch. Scott checked Nina's pulse as a precaution, confirming her heart was beating steadily. He then hoisted his assistant onto his shoulder and carried her out of the warehouse. Without investigating how she'd ended up there, he decided to ask her about it tomorrow. For now, he thought it best to put her in his car and drive her to his house. It was too late to cause a commotion at the clinic. In the car, Nina briefly stirred, mumbling only one word. "Mummy?" She showed no further signs of consciousness until they reached Dr. Clem's apartment. Scott assumed the nurse was worried about her family, not knowing her whereabouts after work. Despite his aversion to snooping, he searched Nina's pockets, finding her cell phone. Her contact list was short, with her mother's number at the top. Reluctant to alarm an elderly woman late at night, he sent a text. "Mum, I'm on night duty, covering for a co-worker. I'll be home tomorrow." A minute later the reply came. "Thank goodness, daughter. The boys and I were worried. Hugs." Scott smiled involuntarily, realizing he couldn't remember the last time he'd exchanged such warm messages with his own mother. After divorcing his father long ago, she had remarried, moved to another city. No, Scott didn't feel estranged from his family. She had supported him through medical school, even indulging his small pleasures while he lived in the dormitory. From the start of his medical career, Scott was passionate about surgery. He did everything to secure a position in the coveted department, impressing prominent instructors with his aptitude. By 35, he had honed his skills in a district hospital, often resolving ambiguous cases that initially stumped even senior specialists, literally snatching patients from death's door. Once he overheard a conversation between two colleagues. An elderly surgeon told his younger assistant, "Don't resent Dr. Clem. I couldn't choose you for this operation, despite your years of service here. The instruments are like extensions of his hands. It's a skill even I can't match. And look, the boy's barely over 30, yet he's handling complex surgeries with ease. I'm not offended that he's outshining other surgeons. Always remember, we're here to save lives, not compete in medical Olympics." Scott was gratified by this assessment from the man he respected and had learned much from. But strangely enough, the halo of deity did not appear over his head after that. Instead, he delved even deeper into his profession, tackling increasingly challenging cases. His mother often lamented that his work obsession would deprive her of grandchildren. Yet he still had no plans to marry. Scott used to jest. "Mother, give it a rest. Surgery is my wife. She has no rivals in my life." In the bright living room, Nina slept like a princess. Without much thought, Scott retreated to the bedroom and collapsed on the sofa. Exhaustion overwhelmed him instantly. He barely managed to remove his jeans and sweatshirt. The sofa, brought more for show than comfort, now felt like paradise to Dr. Clem. Soon, only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock could be heard in the surgeon's apartment. Neither Dr. Clem nor Nina realized this was to be the last easy day of their lives. The morning at the plastic surgery clinic erupted in chaos. The head nurse, tasked by the director to manage new instruments, discovered utter devastation in the storeroom. Equipment drawers were brutally broken, with remnants of foam, plastic and light chips strewn across the floor. Upon checking the invoice, she realized 30 units of the most expensive inventory were missing. The head of security service was immediately summoned to the boss's office and ordered to retrieve copies of the surveillance camera footage. The footage revealed the clinic's lead surgeon, Dr. Clem, rummaging through shelves in the dimly lit storeroom before hefting something heavy onto his shoulder, though it wasn't clear whether it was a backpack or a large bag. "Don't contact Dr. Clem or investigate this matter," Mr. Garrett commanded. "We can't air our dirty laundry. I'll uncover the circumstances and punish him for this grave offence myself. Everything you've seen must remain confidential." The security chief, who genuinely liked Dr. Clem, dared not disobey. The two men occasionally met at the gym, shared beers after work and chatted about typical male interests. That's why he decided to discreetly message his friend. Minutes later, Dr. Clem, who was due for a 24-hour shift, received a text. "If you didn't do anything unusual at work yesterday, it'd be wise to arrive at the clinic early before your shift starts." The surgeon, roused by his phone's beeping, was initially baffled. Then he remembered bringing Nina home the previous night. Have her relatives complained about her absence? He pondered. What a predicament. Why did she ask to meet in the storeroom, only to fall asleep there? Scott searched for Nina's notes, then recalled crumpling and tossing it in the hallway trash. So now, how could he explain the nurse's presence in his apartment? He needed to wake her urgently. But Nina was deep in uninterrupted slumber, hugging a pillow and smiling serenely. Scott resorted to drastic measures. He lightly dabbed a cotton pad with ammonia and waved it near her nose. She jolted awake, her wide grey eyes fixed on him in shock. Scott didn't need psychiatric training to recognize her dilated pupils as signs of disorientation. Finally, Nina's gaze focused on the man, and she slipped into what's ironically called a stupor. "Dr. Clem, what are you doing here?" she exclaimed. "I live here," the surgeon replied matter-of-factly, "and you graced my humble abode with your presence yesterday." Nina looked around fearfully. "My nurse's uniform is still on. What could have happened between us? I remember nothing after the boss invited me into his office." Mr. Garrett was well versed in pharmaceuticals, one of the latest drugs designed to erase patients' traumatic memories, had evidently wiped out a chunk of her recollection. Yesterday's events up to tonight were clear as day, but then nothing. "Nina, calm down. Let's figure this out together," Scott said gently. "Yesterday, you invited me to meet in the storeroom where we keep our medical instruments. Do you recall why?" "What are you saying, Dr. Clem? I would never dare invite you anywhere. How did I end up in your house? Is this some kind of prank by our colleagues?" "That's what we need to unravel. I found you in the medical warehouse, sound asleep against the shelves. I couldn't wake you, but I couldn't leave you there alone either. I saw no better option than to bring you to my home." Nina stammered. Did you carry me in your arms?" Her cheeks flushed crimson, as was her habit. "Yes, you couldn't walk on your own," Dr. Clem said with a smile. "Now head to the bathroom. You'll find disposable toothbrushes, fresh towels, and a clean terry cloth robe. While I make coffee, you can freshen up. You have half an hour before we leave for work. Oh, and I texted your mother saying you're on after-hours duty." Nina, already en route to the bathroom, turned abruptly. "Thank you, Clem. You're not just a brilliant surgeon and respected colleague. You're humane, generous and kind. I have been assisting for surgeons for years. Many in your field become jaded after daily work with a scalpel, developing a protective layer of indifference to avoid burnout. I don't see that in you yet. For you, every patient is like a cherished child." Meanwhile, Jack Garrett met privately with the owner of the clinic to report the extraordinary situation. The owner of the clinic swallowed the made-up story that the theft was committed by one of the leading surgeons without a second thought. He instructed the director to urgently locate the instruments, return them and punish the culprit to the full extent of the law. But Mr. Garrett mildly objected. "I wouldn't imprison such a specialist. He saved many lives and made numerous clients happy with their new looks. Let's quietly dismiss him and be done with it. Otherwise we might face backlash from his admirers." "I wouldn't mince words with him. But you know your field better. First, we need to find out why he'd want to steal all of a sudden. He makes excellent money. He's got everything he needs for his professional life. He's had a strange breakdown. Sort it out." The director escorted the owner to the car and sighed with relief. Thankfully, they didn't call him to the board of directors with a report. They limited it to a visit from one of the owners, considering it a minor incident. The director's hands literally burned from that bag of scalpels that he himself took out of the storeroom and hid at his summer house. He didn't feel like returning the tools back. He would think later about how to sell them. At the same moment, Scott and Nina were eating breakfast in silence. Both were unspeakably puzzled by yesterday's incomprehensible adventures. Besides, the nurse didn't really remember anything. She couldn't tell them what all these strange circumstances were. They arrived at the hospital together in Dr. Clem's car, which, surprisingly, didn't cause any furore. Everyone was looking at Dr. Clem, and he even began to puzzle over what could have happened there. Scott was glad to be called to the director. He wanted some clarity. Mr. Garrett immediately put forward absolutely incredible accusations of shameful theft, providing as evidence a whole movie about Dr. Clem's adventures in the storeroom. At the doctor's request, he called Nina, but she only blinked her eyes, saying that she didn't remember anything about being in the warehouse. She couldn't confirm or deny anything. She also refused to admit writing the note that Dr. Clem kept mentioning. The surgeon was shocked. What scalpels? What theft? But Mr. Garrett didn't even want to listen to him. He threatened that he would escalate the case if Dr. Clem did not write a letter of resignation right away. At the end of the conversation, he gloatingly added, "I will actively make sure that you leave us with a proper recommendation. No medical institution in the capital will want to see you in their ranks. There's no place for people like you in medicine. You are now nobody, and your name is nothing. Get it through your head, Mr. Clem." Some might consider Scott's further behaviour as weakness, infantilism, even a certain cowardice. Others will understand his pride and not condemn him. Dr. Clem knew for sure that he had not taken any scalpels from the storeroom at the clinic. Moreover, he had not even seen them yet. But to argue, to prove something, to fight for his honourable name, he refused. He suddenly felt such a universal moral and physical fatigue that his legs were shaking. He wrote a statement in no time at all, gathered his meagre personal belongings from his locker, and went home. Nina, who rushed after him with an attempt to justify herself, he sharply pushed away from his car. "Leave me alone, for God's sake! You've already done everything you could for me. Farewell!" The intricacies of fate, human vices, low deeds. Life is teeming with all these gifts of fulfillment. You can't make plans for tomorrow, even if today you're the best at what you do. Scott felt in his gut that something in this story wasn't clean, but he suddenly did not want to unravel this intricate tangle around his person. He wanted to start his life again with a clean slate. Outside the window, the capital was bustling, hurrying, living a full life. But now it seemed alien, indifferent, cold for Scott. The new apartment with its stylish design, and even his fancy car, became joyless. The man realized that in this city nothing happens for nothing. Everything had cause and effect relationships. Scott himself did not expect such quickness from himself. However, he quickly sold his apartment and started packing to leave that city. Nina tried to call him a couple of times, but he didn't answer. He did not want to cross paths with anyone from his past life, in any format. He didn't hold a grudge against her, even smiled to himself, thinking, "My poor shadow admirer. She'll have to assist other surgeons now, and I'm out of the medical business." He did not want to give up his favourite profession forever, but he did not look for a place in the capital, especially after the director's promises that he would now be on the blacklist of applicants for any medical positions. In the evening, when Scott was packing up the apartment, the phone suddenly rang loudly in his pocket. It was his restless classmate from medical school, Sam. The guys had once mastered surgery together at the department. A long-time friend invited him to his anniversary, joyfully asking, "Scott, is 35 years old scary? You've already passed this date a couple of months ago. Share your experience. By the way, I'm expecting you this weekend. No refusals accepted." Dr. Clem grinned. "It's not the time to be travelling, but then again, who's to stop me? I'm a free bird now. Perhaps my old friend from university days in the city will have a job for me. Mr. Garrett's tentacles surely haven't reached so far." He didn't hesitate long. 3 days later, the former renowned plastic surgeon was on his way to the city on the other side of the country. The anniversary party at Sam's house was a roaring success. Drinks flowed like a river, and appetizers were in abundance. Scott wanted to postpone the conversation about job prospects with his comrade for later, but Sam started it himself. "There is a settlement of 5,000 people 15 kilometres from the city. The medical centre in the village can't cope. They would never even dream of recruiting a doctor from the capital, let alone finding regional specialists. You could try working there for a while. Why not? The salary isn't bad. The social benefits are good. But to work there, you need to be a multi-skilled medical professional." Thus, a week later, Dr. Clem began working as a paramedic, surgeon, and general medical specialist in the settlement. Meanwhile, Nina was beside herself with guilt over Dr. Clem's recent misfortunes. The surgeon stubbornly ignored her calls. His apartment door remained locked, the dwelling showing no signs of life. Even spending a whole night on the cold steps of his building, hoping to catch him, proved fruitless. Dr. Clem never appeared. Nina, usually quiet and composed, was a changed woman. Anger simmered within her. She vowed to uncover who had fabricated the case against Scott, a case that reeked of criminal intent. She questioned why, if her idol had truly stolen expensive medical equipment, everything had been handled without involving the police. Arguments about private clinics keeping incidents internal failed to convince her. Meanwhile, a week after Dr. Clem's dismissal, a new surgeon, Marcus Warren, joined the team. No one in the clinic even knew that he was Mr. Garrett's brother-in-law. Both of them kept a cold demeanour in public, no hint of kinship. The clinic staff quickly formed their opinion about the newcomer in the smoking room. "He's a slippery character, reminds me of a slug," remarked one of the nurses. "And did you notice his shifty eyes? He never looks you in the face," a doctor added. All agreed that Dr. Clem had been cut from a different cloth. Nina instinctively kept her distance from the enigmatic Dr. Warren. His sudden appearance at the clinic struck her as suspicious. Realizing she couldn't handle the investigation alone, Nina requested the head of security. "I know that you and Dr. Clem were friends. I love him with all my heart, and I can't accept my colleagues' indifference and detachment, their every man for himself attitude. Scott was clearly framed, and everyone just shrugged it off, as if we hadn't lost a talented surgeon. Any of us could be next. Are they all just protecting their own comfortable positions?" Craig was taken aback, but he agreed, breaking the chief physician's orders. "I don't like this whole rotten business with Scott either, but the facts seem indisputable. I've seen the CCTV footage myself." "If you know anything more about that day, please tell me," the nurse pleaded. "I want to find Dr. Clem. I feel terribly guilty that I failed him, that I couldn't protect him. I want to restore justice. Do you know anything about where he mysteriously disappeared to?" Craig pondered for a while, then spoke his thoughts aloud. I haven't tried contacting him yet, but I will do so. If I manage to find out anything, I'll share that information with you. With that, they parted ways. Nina hurried to the operating room, where she was to assist the unfamiliar Dr. Warren for the first time. But work is work. The day before, Mr. Garrett had an interesting private conversation with his brother-in-law. He instructed Marcus to find buyers for high-quality scalpels. The surgeon, new to his job, didn't ask any unnecessary questions. He just nodded silently, agreeing to do everything. A plan immediately formed in his mind, which he began to execute that very evening. Dr. Marcus Warren was an avid internet user, believing the virtual universe could solve any problem. True to his conviction, after just half an hour online, he posted several ads offering medical instruments for sale. He set good prices and made the specifications tempting. Heading off to dinner with a sense of accomplishment, he didn't expect the World Wide Web's response to be almost instantaneous. Only 2 lines appeared on his screen. Ready to buy the whole set in bulk. The next day, Marcus reported to his superiors that the deal was settled. Jack Garrett realized he'd have to go to his summer house to bring the scalpels to his brother-in-law. He had already told the clinic owners that the equipment wasn't found and that Dr. Clem had left in an unknown direction. He'd fervently persuaded management not to raise a fuss, arguing that many of the surgeon's clients were famous dignitaries. The cost of the equipment wasn't worth risking the institution's reputation. His arguments were accepted, and the scalpels lay peacefully in his house, biding their time. The sale was set for Saturday. Dr. Warren and the goods arrived to a country house to meet a buyer. The man was pleased with the chosen place. Fewer prying eyes. Why draw unnecessary attention? What followed wasn't so pleasant. At the gate stood a tall, menacing fellow with cold eyes. Are you the one peddling knives? Well, come inside then, let's talk. Marcus Warren was no naive simpleton. He'd seen enough crime dramas. He immediately realized he was being invited into the house of some local criminal authority. But he owed Jack for getting him a good job. That's why he agreed to this unclear affair, deciding he'd repay that debt in full. Inside, Marcus Warren involuntarily smiled. The host, just like in the movies, sat at a generously set table. He gestured for the guest to join him, poured a shot of cognac and moved closer. Dr. Warren downed the amber liquid in one gulp and looked boldly into the man's piercing eyes. The buyer maintained a long pause before finally speaking. My people have learned everything about you, Dr. Warren. The goods look good. I'll pay as promised. But I'm more interested in a longer acquaintance with an expert like you. My guys are hotheads. They get injured often. You could patch them up. I'll put you on a good salary, on top of what you make at the clinic. What I need from you is to always be available, to show up wherever and whenever we call, and keep our deal in secret. Do these terms suit you? Marcus Warren was taken aback, but ambition and greed quickly overcame his doubts. He saw no danger in this proposal. Who would harm a doctor, even in the criminal world? The gang needed him alive and well. For appearance's sake, he asked for a day to think it over, but his mind was made up. He would accept this tempting offer. The parties parted, satisfied with each other. The next day, Dr. Warren texted back his agreement. Then began his routine at the clinic, where things were far from smooth. Clients didn't want to schedule appointments with him. They all remembered Dr. Clem's golden touch. The clinic's income began to plummet, and the owners were ready to forgive talented surgeon for the missing tools to increase the cash flow. So, at the next board meeting, Mr. Garrett was tasked with finding Dr. Clem and bringing him back. The head of security again received a delicate task: to find traces of Dr. Clem at all costs, to visit his mother, to scour his friends and ex-lovers. It seemed impossible that Dr. Clem hadn't been in touch with anyone for months. Craig decided to visit Scott's mother in another city. He invited Nina with him, and she responded to his request with great enthusiasm. Her heart still bled. She confided in her mother, "I would follow him to the ends of the earth. Where he goes, I go. But he passed me by as if I were invisible. God, how I love him." Her mother stroked her daughter's head, assuring her that life was full of surprises and that her daughter would meet her soulmate. Just not this one. Nina bristled. "You don't understand. I don't want anyone else." At Dr. Clem's mother, luck was on their side. The woman saw no ulterior motive in their visit, and sensing something in Nina's anguished eyes, she revealed where her son now lived and worked. As she served them tea, the woman lamented, "How time flies. It's almost been a year since Scott went there for a few days and ended up staying. He won't even consider returning to the capital. Perhaps you can convince him it's a mistake. He's so talented." On the way home, Nina agreed with Craig not to disclose Scott's whereabouts. Let their cunning boss handle all the mess with his superiors. They wouldn't let a good man down. At home, Nina broke down in tears. Her hope that Dr. Clem would return to the capital had become a distant dream. Her mother, lost in thought after the story, suddenly asked to repeat the name of the village where Scott lived now. Nina answered, and the woman clapped her hands in astonishment. "Nina, this can't be. Such coincidences don't just happen. My parents once lived in that settlement. They worked at the breeding experimental vegetable station. Both were agronomists. My father made an important discovery. I was just a little girl when he was called to the capital to work at a specialized research laboratory. We've been here ever since. I married late. You were born, then your siblings. There's more, daughter. Mr. Garrett's ancestors are from there too. When I worked in your centre's accounting department, we got to talking, and that's how we found out. And that's why he helped you to get a job there. It was our shared roots, the memories of our small homeland. What a small world we live in. Our grandfathers' graves are still there. I've never been back." Meanwhile, Jack Garrett listened to the report of the surgeon's disappearance with indignation, shouting, "Craig, this isn't a needle in a haystack, and he didn't go abroad. Find him at any cost." Craig bravely deflected these attacks. Besides, Jack, already neck-deep in this mess, didn't want to dig any deeper either. He pretended to take action, but let everything slide. Only the owners of the clinic were dissatisfied with the result, but even they had more pressing matters. In the quagmire of daily hospital routine, another year passed almost unnoticed, but still there was no news from Dr. Clem. Nina celebrated her 35th birthday in proud solitude, at least in terms of romantic companionship. The years slipped by in a futile longing she could do nothing about. She found no joy in the courtship attempts of various suitors. After her birthday, she quitted unexpectedly, claiming she'd found a quieter workplace, better suited for her family. A reserved person, she was soon forgotten by her colleagues, who never had reason to doubt her competence during her many years of service. After a couple of days of gossips about her sudden leaving, everyone returned to their routines. Dr. Warren had found his footing and finally excelled at plastic surgeries. He received faithful payment for his rare house calls to the criminal authority. He'd treat and monitor patients as needed, ensuring no complications arose. It was a good arrangement. He'd make a couple of house calls a month, and the money would appear in his account like clockwork. Who wouldn't enjoy such a setup? He grew plump, constantly spoiling his wife and children with expensive gifts and taking them to resorts. Everything seemed set to continue smoothly, but, as the saying goes, you can only stretch a string so far before it snaps. However, before an unexpected turn of events, Another year flew by. An argument erupted in one of the capital's mansions. The participants were the same man who had once arranged for Dr. Clem to work at the plastic surgery clinic, and his ever-present beautiful girlfriend. He neither knew how nor wanted to refuse her slightest requests. This woman was his secret weakness. Now she demanded he find Dr. Clem, even if he had to dig him up from underground. She wanted to enhance her figure, and, if the mood struck, improve the shape of her cheeks and chin. But Dr. Clem wasn't answering her persistent calls. For the first time, the mighty man was at a loss. Then there was the murky theft story, which he, as one of the clinic's co-owners, certainly knew about. He knew about it and didn't believe that a surgeon could be involved in anything shady, but before he hadn't had time to look into it. Having thought over his beloved's request, the man finally decided to unravel this long-standing story. He didn't inform his partners in the business of his plans, but went to an old friend with whom he had been in juvenile detention. Their paths later diverged, but they maintained a strong connection. Over good cognac and delicacies, the old friends were surprised to discover that the threads in the case of the disappearing scalpels led not to Dr. Clem, but to the current doctor of the criminal authority. That night, Marcus Warren learned that his criminal superiors were far from angelic in his approach to solving issues. So, Marcus quickly spilled his guts about being the clinic director's brother-in-law, and that he had asked him to help sell expensive medical equipment. The criminal authority smirked and winked at his old friend. You see how quickly we solve all the dark questions? The answers are found almost immediately. Punishment for injustice comes like a boomerang. A very good surgeon, you say? I wouldn't refuse to have such a doctor in my team. And you, Marcus, go and report your chief. We need to restore the doctor's honourable name in medical circles. I like things to be fair. Toward morning, Jack Garrett's doorbell rang. It was his brother-in-law with broken fingers, bandages and wild eyes. From the threshold, he began whispering to his relative and boss that he'd better leave, that everything was terrible, that serious people wanted to deal with him, to restore the former status of the brilliant surgeon to Dr. Clem. The director of the clinic barely managed to make out this confused monologue, and when he realized what was going on, he said, "What a fool! That's what I get through my sister's request to hire you where the money flows. You were never a good surgeon, Marcus, and you've been hiding from me for so long that you're working on criminals. Now get out of my sight. Don't go to the police and convince your second employer to not name me anywhere. I'll disappear with my family for a while." Coincidences in our lives actually happen much more often than Nina's mother thought. Not knowing anything about where the surgeon he had dismissed had been living for almost 3 years, Jack Garrett also decided to direct his footsteps to the same settlement on the other side of the country. He had relatives there. The place was well hidden from unnecessary curiosity, deep, picturesque, surrounded by mountains. Just the right place to heal wounds and hide. Jack told his wife and son that he was tired of travelling to warm countries. He wanted to see their country and visit his relatives. 2 days and 10 hours on the road. A trifle of life compared to the threatening danger. With about 5 hours of driving left to the settlement, Jack's son started to get motion sickness, vomited, refused to eat and became weak. When they arrived at the settlement, the boy's temperature spiked and he began to complain of sharp, strong pains in his abdomen. It became clear that all the symptoms strongly resembled acute appendicitis or even peritonitis. Jack stopped a passerby and asked about any doctor here. "Recently, the new clinic has been built. It's over there, 2 blocks straight. A surgeon works there, a local celebrity. The whole town rushes to this doctor if a case is serious or doubtful. He has already pulled so many people back from the brink of death." Mr. Garrett calmed down a little. The small 2-story hospital building shone with the fresh plaster of snow-white walls. Around the blue-painted porch were 2 flower beds. Everything was so near, as if it were a toy. A man sat with his back to the door at the reception desk. "My son is not well. Leave all your business now and attend to the patient." The white-uniformed doctor turned slowly at the voice. Scott Clem, the former head doctor of the capital's plastic surgery centre, was looking at Mr. Garrett. The legs of the man shook as he realised he could lose. His son's life was at stake, and he had nowhere to turn for help. His boy might die from the inflammatory process that had already begun. The silence seemed like an eternity to Scott's former boss, but in reality it lasted only a few seconds. Then everything sprang into motion, filled with sounds. Dr. Clem quickly examined the boy, nodded soothingly to the man who had once greatly dishonoured him, and ordered, "Prepare the operating room. Suspected acute appendicitis. Check blood type, coagulation, RH factor, and run all biochemistry. We have very little time." The boy was taken away, and his father's legs could barely support him. Scott Clem, before leaving, said to someone, "Honey, give the patient's father a sedative injection. I don't want him to have a heart attack. We can't handle 2 emergencies at once." "Okay, dear, I'll do it right away." Mr. Garrett felt a sense of déjà vu. His former nurse, Nina, now stood before him with a syringe and cotton swab, her face stony as she performed her medical duty, clearly struggling to maintain composure. She gritted her teeth and said, "You can relax. In my husband's hands, everyone gets better, because he's a doctor from God, unlike you, who came to medicine from hell." Nina was right. Dr. Clem was just in time. In a couple of hours, Jack Garrett and his wife were even allowed to look into the ward where their son had been brought after surgery. That same evening, the doctor and his devoted nurse walked home together, joking. "Did you see the look on that creep's face when we appeared to him like ghosts? He was in shock," Scott said with a smile. "Well, no more shocked than you were when my mum, brothers and I showed up on your doorstep and said, 'We have nowhere to spend the night, Dr. Clem. Won't you shelter this poor family, for old time's sake, while we find a place to live?'" "Come on," said Scott, embarrassed. "There's never been a more devoted person in my life than you. I realised it the moment I saw you at my door. Now it's only together and forever. I don't want to go back to the capital, not under any circumstances, for any reason, or for any amount of money. There are different people and different air there. Nina, why are you suddenly pale? Are you feeling ill again?" Nina laughed, looking gently at Scott. "You're a doctor. You know that in the first trimester of pregnancy, sickness is almost inevitable." "I love you, Nina. You're my miracle." "And I love you too."